I'm Steve and I'm a qualified Braemar installer. I urge you to watch this video in conjunction with the installation manual for the safest possible procedure for the installation of the Braemar LCB evaporative cooler. Step 1 of your installation manual is about safety. Safety for you and your co-workers is important, and Sealy International has set out this information as a guide for you. But at all times, you must follow the national and state occupational health and safety regulations associated when installing Braemar coolers. It is always good practice to complete a risk assessment form similar to this prior to each new installation, and then follow your own recommendations. Unwrapping the cooler. To unpack the cooler, you first need to place the cooler on the ground close to where you intend lifting it onto the roof, and then cut away the shrink wrap, but be careful not to cut the pads. Removing pads. Now you need to take the pad frames off. This is done by using a flat-bladed screwdriver and inserting it into the two slots on the top and releasing the pad. With the pad released, lift it off the cooler and put it carefully to one side. Repeat this process for the other three sides. You will find the control kit located inside the cooler. Remove it and put it aside ready for use later, as it contains all the necessary components needed to complete the installation. Removing the venturi and the transition. To assist the installation and to make the cooler easier to carry onto the roof, you must remove the venturi and fan assembly. First, release the motor cable from under the electronics module by removing the screw under the isolation switch and lifting it out of the tank. Place the module to one side for fitting later. Do not lose the screw, as it will be needed later. Remove the venturi by disengaging the two clips located on opposing sides of the tank and lift it out. The pallet located underneath the cooler is used as a transition piece to mount the cooler onto the dropper. To remove, turn the unit on its side and disengage the clips on the four corners, pulling them firmly as you go. With the cooler unwrapped and dismantled, you can now proceed with the rest of the installation. Cooler location. Location is very important if you want a happy customer. Try and find a position that is fairly central for balanced air distribution, but not above sleeping or living areas, as the cooler may disturb. Also, don't forget the neighbours, who will not want to listen to the cooler every night. Also, don't forget the sewer vent, as it should be at least 5 metres from the cooler, or 3 metres from a wood fire flue, or 1.5 metres from a gas heater flue. We don't want to recycle these gases. Mounting the dropper. A raw edge or safety edge dropper must be used to avoid interference with the opening and closing of the weather damper. We suggest you cut a 50mm hole and fit the cable grommet before you take the dropper onto the roof. It's easier that way. Its position is left-hand side panel, just above the outlet and towards the front or gutter side. The grommet is held in position by 2 screws. When you prepare the dropper entry hole into the roof, don't forget we need to attach the dropper on 3 sides, which may require the addition of a crosspiece. Before you take the dropper onto the roof, temporarily fit the transition piece. This will assist in gauging the best height to mount the dropper. Ensure the transition is orientated correctly by using the engraved detail on the transition. B must be to gutter side and A to roof side. The clips that lock the weather damper in place can be temporarily bent back and re-engaged to enable access down the dropper during this stage of the installation. These will be broken off later. The sides of the dropper must fit snugly behind retaining clips on the transition. If not, the weather damper will not open and close correctly. There are 8 V-notches located under the transition to fasten it to the dropper. Only 3 or 4 screws are needed at this stage. Now take the dropper and transition onto the roof and lower into place. Please be aware that the dropper cannot sit on the ceiling timbers, as this will transmit noise into the home and cause vibration. If it does, you will need to shorten the dropper. Use a spirit level to ensure the top of the transition is level in all directions. With the dropper in position, you can now screw the dropper to the roof timbers on 3 sides. Once you are happy with the height and level of the dropper, remove the transition piece and fully flash the dropper so water cannot get into the roof space. If you have used long rivets or screws for the flashing, make sure they don't interfere with the weather damper. If so, you will need to cut the stems off. Fitting the transition to the dropper and securing. Once the flashing is complete, ensuring it is orientated correctly, refit the transition with the 8 screws supplied. Always recheck the transition is level after fitting the screws and rectify if necessary. Now, completely break off the clips on the transition that retain the weather damper. Ensure you're able to open and close the weather damper fully and it is not interfered with in any way. If so, now would be a good time to investigate and rectify. Transporting the cooler to the roof and fitting to transition. It's now time to take the cooler onto the roof. Using a minimum of 2 people, carry the cooler to the roof. This approach is one recommended method for taking the cooler onto the roof. Ensure you're using a suitable strength rope that is in good condition. In attaching the rope to the cooler, you must position the rope around the central tank and tie off in the centre. Never use the corner pillars, either singularly or multiples, for tying off the rope, because they're not designed to take this type of load. Always have a minimum of 2 people doing this task and ensure you have a stable foot stance before taking the weight of the cooler. Please don't forget to take all necessary safety precautions when carrying out this task. Mounting the cooler to the transition. With 2 people, the cooler can be fitted to the transition. Ensure all 4 corners are engaged correctly by pushing down firmly on the unit until they click into place. The control box always ends up on the left-hand side, towards the gutter side of the cooler. Run the power and wall control cables down the dropper. Open the control kit and remove the power cord and thermostat cable ready for installation. Drop the power cord plug end along with the looped end of the thermostat cable down the cavity into the dropper. Feed all the thermostat cable down the dropper as it will be needed to reach the wall controller. Lock the power cord into place by sliding the socket sideways into the keyway in the tank. Leave the thermostat cable end in the tank as it will be connected later. For ease of access, it is important to pull both cables through the grommet before the ductwork is connected. It's critical these cables are held out of the way of the weather damper, so pull them through firmly and don't leave excess cable in the dropper. To prevent these cables from interfering with the weather damper, Route them through the transition and seal the hole with the plug provided. Power and water. The water supply plumbing regulations will vary between states, and these regulations must be followed. Ensure the pipes are well saddled to stop banging pipes, as this will prevent any unwanted return visits. We require the use of ball valves, similar to the one shown, for an isolation valve. With LCB units, the water supply run will need to terminate with a 1/2-inch BSP compression fitting, close enough to attach the flexible hose. We've shown an example of an assembly suitable for use in South Australia. Also, don't forget, if the area is subject to freezing in the winter, that drain-down facilities are required. Please remember that if the water pressure exceeds 800 kPa, then the plumber must supply and fit a suitable pressure-reducing valve. Mount a GPO within 1 metre of the cable exit grommet on the dropper. It must be installed by a licensed electrician on a separate dedicated circuit from the power board in accordance with local and national wiring standards. Fitting the wall control. It does not matter which control system you install, the selection of the best place for the wall control is the same. The most used room, 1.5 metres above the floor. Avoid direct sunlight or heat sources like stoves, TVs, etc. Avoid external walls. Select an internal wall. Avoid drafty areas or dead spots. For Braemar controls, use the wall bracket as the template to drill the holes for mounting and cable entry. Align and screw the bracket into position using the supplied screws. Using the loop provided, pull the control cable through the hole at the wall bracket. When the cable is through, remove the tape forming the loop. Plug into the socket on the back of the controller and clip the wall control onto the lugs provided to complete controller installation. Connect water supply and drain system to cooler. The control kit will have all the parts needed to connect the water supply and drain system. Take the float ball and rotate it onto the float valve assembly. With all washers and O-rings in place, assemble the float valve to the cooler with the extension piece firmly tightened until it seals against the rubber washer. Now connect the solenoid and extension hose to the extension piece, ensuring the terminals end up facing towards the corner of the dropper. Connect the 2 terminals of the solenoid cable to the solenoid. It doesn't matter which terminal goes on which lug. Push the plug end of the cable through the hole in the transition. Then pull the cable through the entry hole into the tank and route through the cable supports around the tank. Leave it to one side as it will be connected later. Make sure all the cable is pulled through and the solenoid is orientated correctly before clipping the solenoid cover in place. Finally, connect the flexible hose to the isolation valve. Water will not enter the tank until the unit is commissioned. Ensure the rubber O-ring is fitted between the drain valve and the tank and fit as shown. Firmly hand tighten the nut. Don't use multi-grips or Stilsons as they may damage the thread. You can now fit the appropriate adapter for your area to the drain ready for termination to waste.